We've been talking about what causes magnetism. And one of the things I want you to understand is that when God designed things in nature, He planned not just for how natural things could happen, but how man could use the things that He was designing. And so when you talk about magnetism, it all starts with an electron. You remember this is a model of an electron. Electrons spin, and electrons have a north pole, and electrons have a south pole. And so what that means is that the way the electrons are arranged controls different types of magnetism. Down here on the table we have 4 electrons and they're all lined up. Materials like that are like this magnet. This magnet has the electrons all lined up, so it's a very strong magnet. And it attracts materials that have all the electrons pointing the same way. If we have materials where these are all messed up, so if I turn these around every which way, then we have materials that are not magnetic. And so, for example, if I put my finger on this magnet, let me take this bar off, no, don't get much attraction there, because all of the stuff that makes up my skin, the electrons are running every which way. So there's no magnetism. And we've talked about the fact that inside the brain and in living materials that there's sometimes materials that are sort of lined up. You know, you have things that have an alignment that maybe look a little bit like this. Some of them are lined up with north, and the north may be just a little bit off like that. So those are materials like these. They don't attract each other. But if you put them on the magnet, whoa, we have attraction. And interestingly enough, they didn't attract before, but now they attract. So what's happened is that the materials that are in this substance, which is not ferromagnetic, it's not like the magnet, but it's close to the magnet. And so they can be magnetized, but they don't stay magnetized. Now we talked about how that works, you know, how that's used to protect us from dangers in outer space. We've talked about how that is used by animals to navigate. It's also used by man in some very special ways because of something else that happens. Let's suppose that we got all these electrons down here and they're lying around just taking it easy and having a good time and pigging out and watching TV and what have you. And all of a sudden, this big, strong magnet comes across. And remember, the magnet has a north pole, and they have north poles and south poles. So what's going to happen when the magnet comes by? Yeah, they're going to try and do this. You know, because each electron has a north and a south pole. Now, in the real world, what happens is that if you have a wire, and if you pass it through the magnetic field, electricity is generated in the wire. All right, let me show you now what we can do to show how the arrangement of the electrons that God designed can be used for some really neat stuff for you and for me. We're going to take this wire and we're going to wind it up like this. We have a name for that. We call it a coil. And a coil is just a wire wrapped up like that. But that's not very neat, so let's look at a better one. Look at that coil. Boy, that's a cool coil. And it's got all these connections here that we can fasten up to wires. I'm going to take this coil, I'm going to fasten it up to this meter. So we'll put one end of the wire here and one end of the wire here. So now what we have is a lot of wire, and it's fastened to a meter that can tell us whether there's electricity flowing in the wire or not. So I'm going to take my magnet, which has now been extended like this, and I'm going to push it down in the coil like that. Boom, and pull it back out. Boom, and pull it back out. And look what happens on the meter. You watch the meter, and I'll push this into the coil. Here we go. There's the movement. Push it in, pull it out. Push it in, pull it out. Push it in, pull it out. Now that electricity goes back and forth, and we call that alternating current electricity, and it's the kind of electricity that runs your TV set, that works in all the things that happen in your house. Let me show you how they do that. Look at what I've got over here. This is a homemade generator. It has a magnet, that's what this is, and it has a wire. And that wire can move through that magnet. So if I turn this handle, you can see the wire moving through that magnetic field. So it's doing the same thing that I was doing over there with the coil. The wire is actually moving through the field, and this actually works. Let's take our meter and hook it up to this. Okay, now we have our generator hooked up to our meter. So the electricity that's generated here will flow through the meter, and you can see that the meter will be moving because of what happens with the generator. So here we go. We have this strong magnetic field coming here, and watch what happens. Notice the faster I go, the more the meter deflects. If I go real slow, the needle doesn't move very much. And if I go real fast, then it can force that meter right off the scale. That's how generators send electricity to your house. That's how generators send electricity to make your car work. There's even a thing in your car like this, which generates electricity so you don't have to run on a battery all the time. God has created these things so that we can use them, and this is what science and engineering is about, is to be able to take the things that God has given us and design them and arrange them so that man can use them to make things comfortable in his world and to be able to solve the problems that man faces. So somewhere around your house there is a big generating station. It's a place where the coil that I showed you is turned around and around. Now that may be done by falling water, or it may be done by nuclear energy, or by some kind of a fossil fuel, but it's the way in which we move the coil. And the coil then sends electricity to the power lines that bring the electricity to your house. So how do we have electricity? Because God has designed the things that we can use to generate electricity to supply the needs that you have.